All right, guys, I want to do a little mini lecture with you. I don't know if you had me before when I had to do this online last time. But what I like to try to do is just do some mini lectures anywhere from 10 to 20, 30 minutes. That way you have time to look at them and you can do it in your off time when you are not working or dealing with kids or whatever. I know a lot of you guys have a lot of stuff going on in your life, and we all do. I have just as much going on in my life as anybody. So I understand the time constraints, and I try to be, as good as I can be about presenting lectures in a short amount of time. So anyway, I'm going to get started with the endocrine system. I know you guys have been through AMP1, and you know a good bit about how to study for this class and how to do well in this class, or you wouldn't be where you're at. You wouldn't be in AMP2. Um, I am going to tell you this is one of the hardest chapters you're going to have to go through and understand. So I highly recommend watching all the videos that I'm going to post on it because hormones are very complicated how they work. They work on one cell one way and they work on another cell a different way, and then they'll work on the third cell even more differently. And they can speed up, slow down, do a lot of different things. They're very, very powerful chemical messengers, and that's what we're going to be looking at in this chapter. So to give you an overview of what the endocrine system is, it's just a system of glands and the nervous system working together to release these chemical messengers that tell the rest of the body what to do. And really, if I had to describe hormones in the best way, it's like they're the master controllers of everything going on in your body. If you're female, you probably know more about hormones than males do because your hormones get imbalanced at different times of the month, and males tend to be fairly stable except around puberty. And around puberty, males get way out of whack with testosterone and that kind of thing. But female hormones fluctuate during the cycles of the month and through the menstrual cycle and all that. That we'll get to when we get to the reproductive cycle, and we'll try to understand why that happens and what they do to your organs, brain, and even emotions and everything else that goes on. Um, so again, the endocrine system is very complicated, and I'm going to try to make it as understandable as possible by going through it and simplifying some of this stuff for you. Hormones are really slow acting in most cases. They have to be released, and then they have to go somewhere, and they have to hit the target cell or organ, and they have to bind, and then they have to go through the process of either going into the cell or binding and using what we call a second messenger to make that cell change. And we'll go over both of those later on. So endocrinology is simply the study of hormones and the endocrine organs and how they work. And I thought I had this fixed, but I don't. And it's not going to let me go to the next slide. I should have hit this earlier. Let's see. I'm glad I'm not a radio host. They always say dead air makes for a boring show. But this should switch over here just a second. Wow, it's never taken this long. It usually does this, but it doesn't take this long. So anyway, let me go into what's going to be on the next slide anyway. Your endocrine organs are isolated in the body. They're not physically connected to each other. They are chemically connected to each other, but not physically. And what I mean by that is they're spread out um, throughout the body. So some are located in the upper part of the body, lower part of the body, but they don't have a physical connection like your digestive system. Let's think about your esophagus, your stomach, your small intestine, large intestine, rectum. Everything's connected, and that goes through the same thing. Um, so when we look at the endocrine system, we have to look at it as a chemically connected system. And this is finally work, but what I mean by chemically connected is one hormone is released by a gland, and then it goes to another gland. It causes that gland to do something that makes it release a hormone, and then eventually it will get down to what we call the target cell or the target organ, where it will actually bind to it and make some kind of change to that cell to make it do something different than it did before. And we're going to look at two different types. We're going to look at what we call amino acid based hormones, and then we're going to look at what we call steroid hormones. And they act differently because of the cell membrane. And I'll get to that later, but the cell membrane is a lipid bilayer. And so a lipid hormone or a fat based hormone or a steroid based hormone can move right through that lipid layer, but an amino acid based hormone or a water based hormone cannot. So that's kind of one of the more important things you need to remember when we go through this. And I'll get to that in a minute and talk more about it and show you the different systems and the way that they actually enter the cell. So anyway, endocrine system basically controls everything in your body. So if you can think of it, there's a hormone that works on it. So reproduction, growth, development, electrolyte balance, water balance, nutrient balance, cellular metabolism, energy balance, body defenses with your immune system, all of that requires a hormone to work on it. And you have studied these in AMP1, these things called exocrine glands. Exo means outside, so these produce non-hormonal substances that move things to the surface of a membrane. And if you think of sweating, it moves it to the surface of the skin, which is a membrane. What we're going to concentrate on is the endocrine glands, and these produce hormones. And the biggest difference, and I'll just tell you now, this is probably a test question. What's the difference between an exocrine and an endocrine gland? Endocrine glands lack ducts. They don't have that pathway for materials to move onto a surface. They are simply released into the bloodstream. All right. So when you're looking at exocrine glands like a sebaceous gland or a sweat gland, these things move up to the surface of the skin, whereas an endocrine gland dumps things into the bloodstream. And that's what we're going to study in this chapter, are those hormones, and not necessarily hormones, but cosinoids and other substances that are released that go either into the bloodstream or go to a neighboring cell and cause some kind of change to go on. All right, so I'll give you the definition of a true hormone here in a minute. Endocrine glands, we have the pituitary, thyroid, parathyroid, adrenal, pineal gland, the hypothalamus, and again, this is a good test question. What is the only neuroendocrine organ in the body? That is the hypothalamus. And the hypothalamus is the part of the brain that controls the pituitary gland. We used to think the pituitary was the master gland. That used to be its nickname. But as medical science advanced and neuroscience advanced, we got to understand that it's actually the hypothalamus that releases hormones that causes the pituitary gland to release its hormones that control everything else. So kind of keep that in mind. This works like a chain. It's this hormone's released, it causes this hormone to be released from another organ, and then this one and this one and this one. And that's what makes this chapter a little bit more complicated than some of the others you have studied so far, because there's a lot of complicated pathways, and I'll show you those here in a few minutes. Some have both endocrine and exocrine. If we think of the pancreas, for instance, we think of insulin and glucagon regulating blood sugar, but it has a whole nother activity that it does, and that is to release digestive enzymes. And it releases a lot of the enzymes we need to break down our food to get energy from it. The gonads are the same way. They produce sex cells, but they also produce the hormones like testosterone and progesterone, estrogen, those type things, and even the placenta. Um, I don't know, and this sounds kind of gross. I don't know how many of you remember people eating placentas about 10, 15 years ago. Might have been 20 years ago. I can't remember. They all ran together, but I know like Tom Cruise and his wife ate the placenta, and there's even a cookbook for it. But it does have hormonal action. And if you think of animals, if you have ever been on a farm or had a dog or a cat, when they give birth, what do with the placenta? They eat it, and they eat it for a reason. It stimulates breast production of milk. You have a lot of prolactin. You have oxytocin that's released and makes them bond with their babies. So again, it's something that nature usually looks at as being the right way to do things. Us as humans, we kind of steer away from that because it seems gross. But there is some scientific evidence behind it that actually people should eat the placenta, and that should be part of childbirth. Um, Instantly, when women eat placentas, their breasts will increase with milk and they will produce more, just because of the hormones that are contained in it. Some of the other tissues that produce hormones, I'm just going to put this out here. Every tissue in your body basically produces hormones. So adipose, which is fat, fat cells actually produce a hormone called leptin that actually makes you fatter, and cortisol that makes you fatter. So the more you put on weight, the easier it is to gain weight. The more you take off weight, then you start to cut down on those hormones, then you can start losing weight again. The thymus produces hormones involved with the immune response. The small intestine, stomach, kidneys, all of those have digestive roles. The kidneys also have blood pressure control with renin, angiotensin 2. We'll get into that later on. We talk about how that works. And the heart even has a role in regulating blood pressure. So, HUL natriuretic peptide, for instance, will help regulate blood pressure. And we'll study that a little more when we get to some of those systems in the body. So this is pretty easy. I'm going to kind of just sit here for a second, just go over, but just notice that all these organs are spread out. They're not physically connected, but they are chemically connected. And they're chemically connected by the hormones that they release. And that goes to different places in the body. You're going to have this in lab when we come back and meet in lab again. I'll go over this stuff with you at that point. I do want you to know the definition of a true hormone. And a true hormone is a long distance chemical signal, and it travels in the blood or the lymph. And this is something that also has a target organ, and it has to go somewhere else, or target cell, for instance. It has to go somewhere else from where it's produced. So the true definition of a hormone is a molecule that leaves one gland and goes somewhere else in the body and causes some kind of cellular organal change that occurs in the body. An autocrine, auto meaning self, these are chemicals that exert effects on the same cells that secrete them. So it would be, just as an analogy, and this doesn't even pertain to the endocrinology, but think about you as a person. When you sweat, that sweat is secreted and it cools you down. That would be similar to what we think of as an autocrine. And an autocrine with cells basically takes care of that cell, and it doesn't do anything anywhere else in the body. Paracrines are going to be produced by one cell in a certain organ, but affect another cell in that organ. The pancreas is a great example of that. You know, basically we have one set of cells in the pancreas that create hormones, and we have another cell set that makes up the digestive enzymes that things we need, but we call those local chemical messengers, and they're not part of the endocrine system. So a true hormone, and again, this is a good test question, a true hormone is something that's produced in one cell set that goes to another part of the body and causes something else to happen, right? So again, remember that that definition of a true hormone. Now again, the amino acid based and the steroid hormones act differently, and then the eicosanoids, they are more paracrines, but some scientists consider them to be hormones. We're starting to do some more research with these and figure out that maybe they have a little bit bigger role than maybe what we thought before. But I'm going to go over amino acid based hormones and steroid hormones here in a minute. And I'll probably do that on a different video because it's going to take a few minutes to explain it. And I'll go over the difference between the two and how they act and what they are capable of when they interact with another cell. All right. Excuse me. Those hormones circulate systematically, or systemically, rather. You have to have a receptor on that cell for that hormone to work. So we call those target cells. If the target cell has a receptor, then that hormone can bind with it and cause something else to happen. And the hormones, really what their whole job is to alter target cell activity. And what that means is they change something in that cell and make it do something it really doesn't normally do. It might produce a new protein, it might produce another hormone, it might produce an ion channel or something that it didn't before, or it may even turn on genes to make new proteins. So there's a lot of different things it can do. So again, action of hormones is not specific based on the hormone, it's specific on the cell. So whatever that target cell is, and to kind of give you an example of that, one hormone can act on one cell and speed it up and make it metabolize things faster. And that same exact hormone may bind to another cell and cause it to do the complete opposite. Right? So again, that's something to think about with these hormones. They're varied in what they can do. So they can alter the plasma membrane permeability. They can stimulate synthesis of enzymes and proteins. They can activate or deactivate enzymes. They can induce secretory activity where it secretes a substance or even another hormone. And then they can stimulate mitosis. A good example of that's growth hormone. Growth hormone makes your cells want to replicate so that you grow and become larger. And it has an effect on almost every cell in the body. So again, hormones have a lot of ways that they can affect the body, and these are just a few. And this is kind of a generalized view of what they can do. All right, I'm going to stop here because I want to spend a lot of time on the action of water-soluble versus lipid-soluble hormones. So this is where we'll pick up next time with the next video that I post.